Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I am moving on to Season 6 and speaking about Episode 1, The Hawk. If you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. The Hawk was written by one of our producers, Andy White, and directed by Tony Brand, who directed only a few episodes of The Waltons. Early on, we see Mary Ellen, and as late in season 5, I announced that I was pregnant. Mary Ellen was going to have the first grandchild. Now, as we are into season 6, I experienced the joys of wearing pregnancy padding. I was not actually pregnant in real life, and so they have this sort of, it's kind of like a swimsuit. It's like a bodysuit with a big padded stomach, and depending on what stage of pregnancy you're meant to be in, they can vary the size of that padding. It is hot. It's not particularly comfortable. And then, of course, I have extra layers of clothing. So I wouldn't say I loved playing pregnant on TV, but I was happy to be around at all in those episodes because, as I've mentioned once, Kurt and I were married. Sometimes I wasn't around the house that much, so I missed out on being part of a lot of the scenes that, were I still living at home, I would have been part of. So I was always happy to have some reason to come by the house and be part of an episode. News of what's going on in Europe is becoming a storyline as we start to set up for the U.S. involvement in World War II. So here they're listening to news about the escalation of the conflict and that England is now at war with Germany. One of the main plots in this episode was about this chicken hawk. They have been losing chickens because this chicken hawk is finding them easy pickings. So we have quite a bit of footage of this hawk flying around, and I'm guessing that the majority of this was probably stock footage. But since we actually did see a hawk, it is also possible that some of this was actually shot because they had this hawk, and clearly it was trained to, as they will with falconry and stuff like that. So they perhaps were able to actually throw this hawk up in the air and shoot some footage of it. But otherwise, this type of stuff is typically stock footage. The other storyline in this involves the new Reverend. Since Reverend Fordwick has moved away with his new wife, Rosemary, we are in need on Walton's Mountain of a new minister. And Olivia and Corabeth and the now Sarah Bridges, Epps' wife, are the committee that is going to be determining and approving the new reverend. So Sarah comes by to pick up Olivia, and they are going to Boatwright University to meet with a potential new reverend, Hank Buchanan, played by actor Peter Fox. So he is there to express his interest in the reasons why he would love to take on the post. Although he is rather young, he is highly recommended by the professor at the university. And although Corabeth has misgivings about it, both Sarah and Olivia really like his energy and think that he will be a good addition to the community because perhaps he will be able to help bring in some of the younger people into the congregation. Olivia hopes that because Hank is a different sort of a minister and young and into fishing and things like that, that perhaps that will influence John and that they will become friends, that they'll have more in common, and that might encourage John to perhaps come to church more. John and the Reverend do decide to go fishing together. However, they never actually make it to fish. They end up at Yancey's for some reason, and there's a card game going on, and so they end up staying and playing cards with Yancey. Once again, we get to see all the wonderful animals that live with Yancey in his house, around his house. Needless to say, Olivia is none too happy to learn that this fishing date ended up being a card game instead. So she's beginning to think that perhaps her dreams of this encouraging John to go to church may be unfounded. When Erin meets Hank Buchanan, the new reverend, she is smitten. And you can see there's a little bit of mutual interest between the two of them. Then one of my favorite scenes, Elizabeth and Amy in the bathtub having a bath, and they are singing Three Little Fishies. And I remember on set, Peter Fox would be singing this song, and we would be, just goofing around, having fun, and all singing Three Little Fishies together. So some of those cute off-camera things that we as actors would share to pass the time. Then one of the things that Corabeth is excited about with this new reverend is the idea of being able to discuss the Bible with the minister. Not that I ever particularly remember her doing that with Reverend Fordwick, but clearly this is an interest of hers. And so she and Ike invite Hank to dinner. And Corabeth keeps trying to talk about the Bible, and Ike keeps talking to Hank about other things. And Corabeth is really frustrated because she's feeling the lack of common ground with Ike, that she's just so bored by him and all the finer things in life that she aspires to and wants to be able to talk about, don't interest Ike. And so she can't share that with him. And so this dinner is not really going the way she would like it to go. I loved this dress that Corabeth was wearing. She had some of the greatest dresses, and as I've talked about, hats as well. So she really scored on the wardrobe. So thinking that she had dresses made, or she, got them from other towns besides, what they stocked at Waltons Mountain. Hank has invited Erin to the movies. So they go to the movies, and we're back at that same movie theater that we've seen when Epp took Sarah and John and Olivia to the movies, and also in Spring Fever when Jim Bob and Ben took their dates. So in this case, we're back there, and this is another Nelson Eddy Jeanette MacDonald movie, this one entitled Sweethearts. So another poster out there in front of the movie theater. After the movies, they go back to Hank's place and they dance. Now, this is juxtapositioned against Corabeth, who is feeling the lack of passion in her life and just that longing for romance. And while Erin and Hank are dancing, Mrs. Brimmer comes by with a casserole or something for the new minister and sees Erin and Hank dancing. So of course the next day at the store, Mrs. Brimmer is gossiping, and she says she doesn't approve of Hank, and she and Mrs. Brimmer gossip about the fact that Hank was dancing with Erin and how inappropriate, and do John and Olivia know about this? And so this gossip is starting up. When Erin heads to work at Fanny Tatum's at the switchboard, she arrives to hear Fanny Tatum gossiping on the phone to somebody about Erin and Hank Buchanan, and she's quite upset about it because she knows this is going to be all over the place. And Olivia and John knew that Erin was going out to the movies with Hank, and they said they approved of it, and they trust Erin and they trust Hank. So it's just small town stuff. Getting a sense about how Hank is a different sort of reverend to what they've experienced in the past. We see him at the Dewdrop Inn. Now, he's not drinking. He just went by to listen to Jason play. So he's a little more liberal than Reverend Fordwick was, but, he enjoys a game of cards, or to go fishing, or to stop by and listen to music. But, he's hardly a hardened sinner, by most people's standards, although the more judgmental of people perhaps question some of these activities for their minister. With an excuse of wanting to show Hank the new choir robes, Corabeth goes by the parsonage, and we see her attraction to Hank, that she's drawn to him, and in wanting to be there for her and allow her to express what's going on and his need and desire to help members of his congregation, he has her sit down and invites her to share what is burdening her. Well, he listens to her, and in her distress, they're fairly close, and Erin and Jason come by and see that through the window. Of course, they see them and come to the door, and Corabeth tries to say, well, I was just showing these choir robes, and it's just a very awkward moment all around.
Come in. Corabeth's here.
I just stopped by to get the key to the church.
I was just showing Reverend Buchanan a choir robe I made. Now that it passes his approval, I must get back to our little store.
Well, it was nice to see you both. Come on, Erin.
Erin takes off. She's back at the house crying, feeling like yet another potential love interest her heart's been crushed again, and she feels somehow betrayed. I'm not sure why, because nothing was really going on, but she's at a young and emotional age, and just very sensitive period of her life. So she's easily hurt. Olivia goes by to see Corabeth, and Corabeth basically confesses to Olivia that she has had this attraction to Hank, and she knows it's wrong, but how bored she is with Ike, but she knows Ike is a good man, and Olivia just sort of listens. She doesn't really want to hear this, but she just listens, and Corabeth gives the impression that it was more than it was. Well, certainly it was on her part. Now, whether it was on Hank's part, I think that's up for grabs, up for debate, and I think that perhaps Corabeth read more into it than there was. But then Olivia leaves, and Ike returns and comes in, and Corabeth, takes him and kisses him, and I think it is a way to move past her own guilt, and just to reassure both of them that she is committed to Ike, and that she's committed to being true to their marriage. Because he feels that he has really upset the community and has not really lived up to what would be needed or expected of the minister, Hank is ready to pack his bags and go. He feels that he needs to turn in his resignation because of all this misunderstanding. And John basically says, hey, no, don't run away. That's not the answer here. Why don't you use what you have learned and share it with the congregation? What is the lesson to be learned here, and how can that help the congregation? And so Hank does decide that is a good idea. And so then he gives a sermon about who he is and who he is as a minister and what he believes, and that he has faults just like any other person, but what his intentions are really, and leaves it to them as to whether they want him to stay. And basically they agree they want him to stay. As for this chicken hawk, Jim Bob and Grandpa decide that they're going to build some sort of a trap to try and catch it. And they put together this cage and put sort of a net over it. They're trying to lure the chicken hawk in with this chicken that is like inside this cage, and they feel like they will catch it in a net then. However, we see it on a couple of occasions where it comes down, but it realizes that this is a trap, and so it flies away. So they're not having much success. But then John says, "Oh well, it's reflecting. The cage is metal. It's reflecting, so it's spooking the hawk." And so John suggests that they paint it the color of the grass. And so they do that, and it does indeed trick the hawk, and they are able to catch it. The plan is to release it up into the mountains, where it won't be bothering their chickens. But Jim Bob wants to keep it and, just watch it, study it, observe it for a few days. So he basically does that. But then after a few days, he realizes that it's time to let the hawk go. So he and Grandpa take the hawk up to the mountain and they release it. It's a lovely opportunity once again for Grandpa, for Will, to give a bit of a lesson about nature and about the hawk needing to be free and have its feeding grounds, and how those are being disrupted by the incursion of more people and building and things like that. But the hope is that it will now have more food sources and won't bother their chickens. However, we do hear in the narration at the end that the hawk did return.
The hawk returned on the day we heard over the radio that Russian bomber and strafing planes had hit Poland from the east.
So what happened from there is not said. Peter Fox as Hank Buchanan was a fun addition to the series. He was with us for season 6. He did about 8 episodes in season 6, and then he returned once in season 7, and then his character was gone. And I'm not sure that there was ever any explanation about where he went or why, but we did seem to have a bit of a turnover of ministers over the last few seasons. I hope you've enjoyed this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons as I start talking about episodes from season 6. I will be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more of your questions in a segment of Ask Judy. Thanks for watching.